Good afternoon. Welcome to this week's SS Rice News Weekly Summary. I'd like to take a few minutes of your time to share with you our observations about the global rice market and key developments, especially around Asia, that we've seen this week. In this week's report, we want to focus on two key markets. One is the Philippines, where there's the important news of the rejection of a proposed tariff reduction for imports that would have helped lower the cost of imports and help lower food prices and ideally address some of the inflationary concerns. And the other would be a 75,000 ton export allowance from India for the United Arab Emirates. This once again shows India offering humanitarian rice exports to various markets, and UAE is just added to the list that includes Singapore, Bhutan, and Mauritius, and there's talk of at least one other African market that is looking for some imports. We also wanted to continue on Bulog's continued presence in the market, so that's what we're going to focus on in the next slide. Before we continue into this week's report, we wanted to look at prices this week. This slide shows you all the prices, and generally we saw a relatively stable Asian rice market. I would say that markets were mixed, with increases as well as decreases noted across key Asian markets, though one might say the prevalent trend was that prices started the week weaker and rose over the week to end on a slightly stronger note, although some markets still left it short compared to the week before. Now, looking at this week's highlights again, we wanted to look at the Philippines, as mentioned already. We wanted to talk about the rejection of this tariff reduction idea and what is going to happen with the Philippines. And this week, interestingly, was also when we decided to do a special report on the Philippines. We also wanted to focus on Bulog purchases that continue, and we heard about private trader interests that are showing in the markets, although nothing that we could hear could be verified, so it just remains largely on the grapevine. But what it does show is that Indonesia seems to be still very active in the buying side of the market. More importantly, we saw the market prices stable this week, but India's 75,000 ton proposed export to the UAE was an important decision that continues our seeking answers to just how much of humanitarian rice exports India will perform to get a quick idea of what this restricted Indian market is going to look like. So as we look ahead, we're really going to look at the Philippines buying interest as a very important part of the markets ahead, how importers respond to this decision on tariffs, how importers respond to economic sabotage laws in the Philippines, how importers respond, and at least for this moment, what we hear from Vietnamese exporters we spoke to is that November exports and movements are already seemingly building up. Next, we want to just look at this Philippine tariff reduction decision and what does it mean. And from our special report, we wanted to take your focus on a few things. First of all, there's this chart from the USDA that really shows you a rising consumption in the Philippines, which is outstripping any production increases we have seen. And this means that when 2024 estimates from the USDA are compared, we're looking at a 3.8 million ton shortage, which compares 16.4 million tons of consumption against a production of 12.6 million tons. This would be the undercurrent that we're looking at within the market. The second chart we wanted to look at would be this domestic price chart in the Philippines. And one might say that a lot of the inflationary elements in the Philippines were imported, as we have seen Philippines face some of the highest prices it's paid for rice in the recent years, as well as a weak peso that only seems to make it look more expensive. And this has added more inflationary concerns into the market. We also wanted to look at India and the 75,000 tons. Most important part within this is how the National Cooperative Exports Limited will deliver these exports. So far, if we look at it, This NCEL group is made up of the Indian Farmer Fertilizer Cooperative, the Krishak Bharati Cooperative of TRIPCO, the National Agricultural Cooperative Marketing, GCMMS, and the National Cooperative Development Corporation, NCDC, and sources close to the market suggest that TRIPCO and NAFED are the two active components within this company in terms of rice market and export activities. How these will be performed, as well as how India decides on future agreements, will be important elements in the rice export world, especially in terms of how much humanitarian rice exports are allowed from India, and this will change the balance in global markets. Next, we also wanted to look at another development in India, and we were lucky enough to be present to watch a video between the Indian Rice Exporters Federation, where we saw Minister Piyush Goyal agree to an $850 minimum export price for Indian basmati rice. What does it really mean? It really boosts Indian export competitiveness in basmati rice. It allows 1509 exports at a lower price, as well as some ideas for blends that are a normal part of Indian exports over the last few years, but they are basically returning to the market. And also interestingly, from a competitive point of view, the Pakistan minimum export price of 1,050 per metric ton would suggest that Pakistan could lose some of its competitive fight in this segment. Next, we wanted to turn back to Bulog, and while Bulog was a very large part of our last report, we are continuing to hear about small players, brokers, private companies and traders in talks with Bulog for more import demand. While none of it could be verified, this only means that all of this information comes from the grapevine. And this is where we turn to that domestic IR64 rice prices, which show a record price when you compare the light green numbers for 2023 against the last 2 years. This is clearly an import sign for us, but what's important is what and how or when Bulog will release the stocks it's built up over the last year into the local market to help calm markets. And one of the ideas that we are toying around with is January to March 2024 is when Indonesian harvests are at their minimum. And this is a very good time for some of these stocks that have been built to be released into the market. So this is something that we're looking at in terms of Indonesia. Finally, we really want to conclude this report. We intentionally kept it short and wanted to talk about the highlights this week. Again, the Philippine decision against tariff reductions, Bulog purchases continuing, a stable market price, as well as India continuing to show rice exports through these diplomatic rice export channels for humanitarian rice. And how this Philippines crop that is underway, how importers respond to this news about tariff reduction, and how the Philippines itself continues to fight food inflation will all combine together and provide us with the kind of markets that we're looking for. I'm still personally a little bit more on the bullish side of price, but with arrivals in India, arrivals in Pakistan, a record arrivals in Myanmar, arrivals in Thailand, even Vietnam's winter crop arrivals, that bullishness may still see some pressure points in the market that allows prices never go in one straight line up or down, but there will be points of ups and downs that show this interaction between supply and demand. With that, I want to really thank you for this week. So once again, we wanted to show you the prices this week, and as we approach October, we wanted to also not forget, rather remind everyone that mid-October decision from India when the 20% duties on parboiled rice exports will shift back to nil, or will it? The jury is out on that. We're still waiting for confirmation, and we are hearing that there's some exporters and even buyers who are already all set up to take the zero duty parboiled rice from India off to destination markets, especially in Africa and the Middle East, where the largest volumes go. So this is a very important event that will shape markets ahead. Also, in the middle of October, we should also see more from Myanmar, which has been monitoring its own licenses. So if they make it an easier trading environment, we'll see India and Myanmar potentially show more activities in October. And once again, we wanted to end this show or this report with a look at rice markets being weather and politics. And this weather where India's rainfall is now just 6% below normal or below the long-term average, which is actually within what would be considered normal. And a normal Indian crop, which is already showing higher acres, the only worry is productivity and yield. So this is where we stop this week's report. Thank you very much for listening.